what you're asking me though?
Okay. My question again would be how did they get around it, or what demonic tactic they used to get around it?
They'll tell you, yes, you have the oldest extant copy that reads Christ, but that doesn't mean all copies read Christ, because why? They'll tell you don't have all the copies. So just because the oldest extant one reads Christ, that doesn't mean that's the original, and it's an ascribal change, because they'll say, do we have many other copies that read Lord? So that's one response they'll give you. Secondly, that argument, there is some validity to it. What do I mean? The oldest copies are not necessarily the ones that are the more accurate. And if you're Greek Orthodox, you believe this. You know why you believe this?
Because the Byzantine text reads
You
Lord.
got it. You believe, and rightly so, because I'm also Byzantine Text, what's called Majority Text priority. I believe that the majority of the Greek copies produced starts the copies that are extant, that we still have and we can access. You'll see the Byzantine text, what's called the Majority Text reading. You see some copies from 400s, but it becomes dominant in the 800s. They are the majority of the Greek copies of the books of the New Testament, over 5,000. But because they're later, scholars tend to not prioritize them because they want to go with the earlier copies, because they think if it's earlier and it's from the Alexandrian stream, meaning manuscripts that read the way copies of New Testament books in Greek read in Alexandria, Egypt, that's where they found some of the papyri, that is most likely to be original. I don't believe that. I reject that. I don't follow that party line. So I go with the majority text. They are the majority of the Greek copies. They have a higher degree of agreement, uniformity, and they are based on earlier witnesses. So if you go with the majority text, you have to always check, does it read the way the earlier copies do? Because the oldest copy of Jude, verse 5, papyrus number 72, around the 200s, it says that it was the God Christ that delivered Israel out of Egypt and then destroyed them in the wilderness. The God Christ. There it says, it was God, but that God was the Christ. Now, beautiful reading. But this is only one reading of an isolated papyrus, whereas other Greek copies that are also around the same time, a little later, will say that it was Jesus, right, who did so. Jesus. Then later copies say Lord. So now you have three readings. There are other variations, but three main readings. The oldest copy says the God Christ. Okay. Well, no one goes with that. The other earlier copies that are also around the same time read Jesus delivered them out of Egypt and then destroyed the wilderness. But then others, and they become the majority, say the Lord did it. So you're going with the oldest extant copy of 1 Corinthians 10. That doesn't mean you're wrong, but you have to be careful because you're not Byzantine, you're not Alexandrian priority, you're Byzantine priority, right?
Yeah.
So then they'll tell you what, you're playing fast and loose with the manuscripts?
Not really. I mean, liturgically, yes.
What do you accept? Well, speak in the mic and don't be muzzled. So as a Greek Orthodox, what do you accept? The majority text?
Liturgically, we use the patriarchal text.
Yeah, which is the majority text. Speak in the mic.
Yeah, the patriarchal text. But I do believe there's some validity to the textual critical version, Nestle Allen, and what they're doing with the earlier, oldest versions. And, they're making decisions between these various manuscripts. And, for example, the example that you gave, some manuscripts read Jesus led them out of Egypt, and some read, Christ God led. They go with certain principles, and one of those principles is, when you read it as Jesus led them out of Egypt, or the monogenes theos, unique God, who would change it to something that sounds wrong? So
you go with monogenes theos now. Is that what you're going? Because now you're all over the map. So you don't go with the patriarchal text, because there it goes with monogenes weus, not theos.
Yeah, I think it's better to use the patriarchal text in the church as part of liturgy.
But you can't. It's better to speak in the church unless you think the church is using a defective text. If there's any place that the church would be careful in the reading it uses, it's in the liturgy. But you're saying, yeah, it's okay they use it in the liturgy, but outside of that, you go with these earlier witnesses. So then which is more accurate, and why would the church employ a more defective reading for the liturgical reading?
I mean, it's not defective in terms of what it means, because we know
So
what
what
it
is the
means.
original?
The original, we're trying to get to the original with the critical text.
If I was a bishop, I'd throw you out of the church, because you're saying that the patriarchal text doesn't have all the original readings preserved, and we're still trying to recover the original. So you're a skeptic. You're dangerous. So you don't have all the originals, readings of the autographs preserved in the patriarchal text?
I mean, the patriarchal text is what the patriarchate has received, and we interpret them in the
You
correct
don't
way.
have all the original readings of the autograph and the majority text that underlies the patriarchal text, so you're still trying to recover the original? That means you're a skeptic. You just opened the door to skepticism, because now I'll bury you anytime you tell me, well, 1 Corinthians 10:9 says Christ. Well, how do you know what the original says? How do you know future discoveries won't uncover a different reading? You're a skeptic, and you're going to destroy faith. You should stay away from apologetics. Stay away from it and just go to church, brother.
Okay, so it's
guaranteed to me that future discoveries of 1 Corinthians 10:9 won't come up with a different reading. You have that? Can you guarantee me that?
no.
So then how the hell can you then assure me that we know what the original of 1 Corinthians 10:9 says, when you just open Pandora's box and saying that the text is in flux because maybe future discoveries will uncover a reading other than what we possess, and that's the true reading? So where's the preservation of the Bible according to your theory?
That's very dangerous, because if we go by that line of thought, we could discover a whole different Gospel of Mark, and that comes up with...
So that's your position. That's what you just said. We're trying to recover the original text, when as an Orthodox, you trust God has preserved all the original readings of the autographs in the majority text, and when you critically examine them, you're going to know what the original is. It's not lost, it's there. And that's why the patriarchal text is founded on the majority text, because that's where the original wordings of the autographs are preserved. You're calling that into question.
No, it's an interesting question. I never thought of it that way, the way that you described it.
Because you want to do your best to try to refute anti-Trinitarians, even at the expense of going against what the church teaches. Dangerous route. You don't do that. But to answer your question, though we have some copies that say Lord, it is clear that the majority text does read Christ. Because right here, I opened up World English Bible. That's based on the majority text, the Byzantine text. But if you're going to be a sharp cookie in apologetics, you don't need the word Christ to make your case. Even if it says Lord, it will make your case. Why? Because you're going to have to identify who that Lord is in context. In verse 4, you're already told it was Christ, the spiritual rock, that followed them. And then later on in verses 14 and 22, you're told who the Lord is, because we drink the cup of the Lord, which is his blood, and we eat the bread of the Lord, which is his body. So who is that Lord?
Obviously, yeah.
So I don't need the reading Christ to prove that even the reading Lord is Jesus. It's there, the context. And more powerful than 1 Corinthians 10:9 is the fact that in 14 to 22, Paul takes Deuteronomy 32, the section of Deuteronomy 32, and if you want to know where exactly, specifically read 15 all the way to 22. Deuteronomy 32, 15 and 22. There it says that Jeshurun, Israel, spurned the rock that fed them, the God who begot them, because they sacrificed to demons who are not God, provoking him to jealousy, provoking him to anger. And then you see that very language used in 1 Corinthians 10, 14 and 22, when he warns the Corinthians, do not sacrifice idols, because you're sacrificing to demons who are not God, and you cannot have communion with the Lord and with demons. Are we stronger than he? Do you want to provoke him to jealousy? The exact language of Deuteronomy 32 about Israel provoking Yahweh to anger, to jealousy, by sacrificing to demons, arousing God's wrath, is the very language Paul now applies to Christ, warning Christians, don't provoke that Lord whose cup you drink, whose bread you eat, by sacrificing to demons who are not God, lest you provoke him to anger In other words, he's going to do to you what he did to them.
Exactly. It's clear from the context. No question.
Yeah, that's it. So even the reading Lord ends up proving it's Jesus. And verses 1 of 4 and 14 to 22 seals it. Paul has just identified Christ as the spiritual rock who's in the cloud, who is feeding them, sustaining them, punishing them. And he is the Lord Yahweh, the rock, whom they provoked by sacrificing to demons, whom he then destroyed in the wilderness. End of story.
Exactly. And interestingly, when you were explaining, Brother Sam, I picked up my Greek New Testament. This is from Greece. So in that verse, it reads Christ again. In New King James,
say that. In your Greek text, what does it say?
Christ, it reads Christ.
Yes, because like you said, the earliest witnesses and the extant copy has Christ, but there are other witnesses that say Lord. But then I see in the majority text it says Christ. But the point being, even if you go with Lord, it's still Jesus.
Right.
My argument does not depend on it having to be Christ. It helps, but it's not necessary, because in the context, if I go with the word Lord, it's still Jesus Christ, who is that Lord that they tempted. So here, in New American Standard Bible, 1995 updated, says Lord. NIV says Christ. Yep, good. And I saw New King James Version, which is based also on majority text, and Modern English Version, Textus Receptus says Christ. So that means, yes, this is also majority reading, but there are those witnesses that say Lord. And to further bolster your point, see here it says Lord. In the NET note, it indicates that even an Gnostic heretic, now before I tell you who, I just want to double check. Too much information for me, I always remember perfectly, even though I'm more perfect than you. But in his particular version of 1 Corinthians, even he read Christ. Let me find it here. Right here. I just want to make sure. Yep, Martian. See?
Oh.
That's why I wanted to first double check. Martian, in his copy of 1 Corinthians, he had Christ in verse 9.
Yeah, and it would be against his position to have Christ in the Old Testament. So it's a double evidence.
That's now strengthened. That's exactly what the note says. Martian, a 2nd century anti-Jewish heretic. If you guys don't know Martian, Martian thought the God of the Old Testament was evil and cruel, and Christ came to save you from that God. And so he took the letters of Paul, edited them, and took the Gospel of Luke, edited them to omit any references to the God of the Old Testament being the God of Jesus Christ. But in his copy of 1 Corinthians 10:9, he has it that they tempted Christ. Now, obviously, you know why he went with that reading, right? Why do you think he went with that reading?
Martian?
Yeah. Why do you think he would want it to be Christ whom they tempted in the wilderness?
Because the Jews are punished there?
Yeah, because they're evil.
Yeah. Yes.
So now that makes your case stronger. But what I'm getting at with you is two things I want you to learn. Don't go against the patriarchal text, the majority text. That's where you're going to find all the original words of the autographs preserved. It's there, not lost. All then that's needed is to examine them critically to come up with a critical edition of the majority text. And you have it in the patriarchal text. Secondly, don't let variant readings cause you to lose confidence in using even the alternate reading, because the word Lord there is still Jesus. It still makes your case.
Yeah, our position doesn't depend on a word used in a certain way. The narrative makes it clear, obviously. So you in general don't like critical text, right? You don't like the Nestle Allen?
No, it's because the critical text, these were papyri found in the 19th century and 20th century, and they're fragmentary, and even those that are more fuller, they have more variations among them than the later majority text. You with me there?
Yeah.
And earlier doesn't mean superior, because you can have a later copy that was copied from a very ancient copy. So I don't subscribe to modern critical theories. I go with the majority text because I believe that God in his sovereignty ensured that the church would have the right copies that had the original wordings of the original autographs in their possession. And guess what? What copies were copied and recopied and preserved? The majority text.
The majority text, yes, of course.
The papyri were hidden and buried. Point being that If God has preserved the word, and he has, then he'll make sure that the church has access to those copies where all the original wording will be found. Well, we know those copies that have been used and have been copied and recopied and preserved, the majority text. The papyri, or the papyrus they found, was buried and only discovered in the 19th century. So it's very difficult for me to understand if these were the copies that were closer to the originals and more authentic, that they were buried and hidden, and then what becomes the majority is these copies of the Greek New Testament, which we call the Byzantine text, that somehow are inferior. I don't buy that.
Yeah.
I don't buy that.
And is the English translation web, is it a strict translation of the majority text?
Which translation?
WEB web.
No, that's actually based entirely on the majority text.
Oh, okay, that's great.
The two oldest copies of Revelation 13:18, I want to go with the two oldest Greek copies of Revelation 13:18. They read 616. Do you know that?
Yeah.
I want everyone to hear this. Why you can't trust the view that if these are earlier, they're more reliable. Because the two oldest copies of Revelation that have Revelation 13:18, number of the beast, read 616. So if we go with the logic, earlier means more reliable because they're close to the originals. That means now your Bibles have to be changed to 616. But Irenaeus destroys that. Irenaeus mentions, and I'll find you the quote because I've used it. He says that there were defective copies of Revelation where they changed the number to 616. Irenaeus even mentions it. He says that's not the accurate number because we have accurate copies from the apostles and the reading is 666. So what do you do with that?
That's very important. Yeah, I never heard of that.
Let me find it for you. It's online. I did sessions on it, but right now let me just get it for you. Irenaeus says there were copies in his time where they changed it to 616, and he says it's wrong. We have accurate copies from the apostles, and we know the number because we were taught it by John, 666. Okay, let me get it. Let me get the code for you. Okay. You see why you got to be careful with the earlier stuff?
Yeah.
Right?
And somebody said, I didn't take that very seriously, but somebody said Sinaiticus was in very good condition, just as well as Vaticanus. They would have to be, worn down by use. Maybe the people thought they were defective and didn't use them.
Exactly. They say that Vaticanus is a proof of a forgery. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't waste my time into those kind of arguments only because you're not going to win. In other words, once you made up your mind, you're going to explain the facts in light of your assumptions. So for me, you want the critical text, more power to you. I'm going to go with the majority text. Look what he says here. He's telling you, beware of those copies that have 616. He's telling you that's not the reading. Don't fall for it. But if you go with the critical theory, critical text theory, eclecticism, you're going to fall for it, not knowing that the Father's already addressed it. Here it is. Right here, boom, let me enlarge it. I gave you the link. Although certain as the number of the name of the Antichrist, yet we should come to no rash conclusions as to the name itself, because this number is capable of being fitted to many names. Look what he's telling you. End time prophecy excerpts. Be careful, because there are many names whose numerical value totals 666. So don't think you figured it out. But now notice from Irenaeus' perspective, Antichrist is still future. He hasn't arisen. Notice he's writing 2nd century, and he's saying, we await the Antichrist of Revelation 13. He hasn't risen yet. However, be careful of assuming you've identified him, because the numerical value of his name is 666. So if you see someone, his name totals 666, be careful.
Okay. Well, that also debunks the modern idea that 666 was applied to the emperor at the time.
Right? Nero, right?
Nero, yeah.
Herodian persecution. Some say it was about Nero. Now here, look what he says, brethren, Irenaeus, about copies that had 616 in Revelation 13:18, saying it's wrong. Hold on. Here you go. Such then being the state of the case, and this number being found in all the most approved and ancient copies of the Apocalypse. You guys see it? He's saying there are many copies of Revelation that are ancient and approved by the church as being accurate. They all read 666. You guys see it?
Yeah.
And those men who saw John face to face bearing their testimony, he means Polycarp, his bishop, they also confirm it's 666. While reason also leads us to conclude that the number of the name of the beast, if reckoned according to the Greek mode of calculation, by the value of letters contained in it, will amount to 666. See, that's the number. That is, the number of tens shall be equal to that of hundreds. So it's going to be 600, and then 6 tens for 60. You get it? Tens meaning 6 times 10, 60. And the number of hundreds equal to that of the units. So 1 unit is 6. So the unit is 6, and it's 6 times 10 for 60, and it's 6 times 100, 666. Now watch what he says. Units for that number which expresses digit 6 of being adhered to throughout indicates the recapitulations of the apostasy taken in its full extent, which occurred at the beginning, during the intermediate periods, and which shall take place at the end. I do not know how it is that some erred following the ordinary mode of speech and have vitiated the middle number in the name. You know, the 60, they turned it into actually not a 60, but a 10. So you have 616. He goes, I don't know how they made that mistake. Right? Because they deduced 50 from the 60. So instead of 666, it's 616. Look, I don't know how they did it. They vitiated the middle number in the name, deducing the amount of 50 from it. So they subtracted 50 from 60, making it 616, not 666. So that instead of 6 decades, they will have it that there's but one. I'm inclined to think that this occurred through the fault of the copyist, as is wont to happen, since numbers also are expressed by letters, so that the Greek letter, which expresses the number 60, was easily expanded into the letter iota of the Greeks. Others then received this reading without examination, like Daniel Wallace. Some in their simplicity, upon their own responsibility, making use of this number, expressing 1 decade. In other words, they went with 616, while some in their inexperience have ventured to seek out a name which should contain the erroneous and spurious number. Some people reading this error, thinking 616, now look for a person whose numerical value of his name was 616, and he warns. Now, as regards those who have done this in simplicity, meaning without evil intent, we are at liberty to assume that pardon will be granted them by God. If someone did it by mistake, God have mercy on him. But if it was done deliberately, look what he says. But as for those who, for the sake of vainglory, pride, arrogance, status, lay it down for certain that names containing the spurious number are to be accepted, and affirm that this name, hid upon themselves, is that of him who is to come, such persons shall not come forth without laws, because they have led into error both themselves and those who confided in them. Now, in the first place, it is lost to wander from the truth, and to imagine that as being the case, which is not, that you've propped up a false number. Then again, as there shall be no light punishment inflicted upon him who either adds or subtracts anything from the scripture. Dire warning for those of you who argue it's 616 and trying to convince people it's 616, and you still insist, you will suffer the wrath of Revelation 22:19. Under that, such a person must necessarily fall. Moreover, final paragraph, another danger, by no means trifling, shall overtake those who falsely presume that they know the name of Antichrist. And I'm explaining what he means. For if these men assume 1, so instead of 666, 616, when this Antichrist shall come having another name that totals 666, that's what he's saying, they will be easily led away by him, as supposing him not to be the expected one who must be guarded against. Okay, you see how serious it is? Let me break it down for every one of you. He's saying, if anyone has deliberately changed 666 to 616, or insist it's the right number, God will punish him according to Revelation 22:19, where you're warned, if you add, take away, God will take away your portion of the tree of life. And then he says, you will also deceive people. Watch his logic. If you tell people the name of the beast 616, they're going to look for someone whose name totals 616 and be misled, because the Antichrist, his name will total 666. So let's say the Antichrist arises, but you see his name is 666. That's not him, because his name has to tally 616. You will then deceive them into following the Antichrist.
You dissuaded me from the critical text position in 7 minutes, too, Brother Sam.
There you
Really.
go back
I mean,
to the patriarchal text. That's where you're going to find all the original words preserved. I know it's convenient to use the critical text or the textual apparatus and the variant and the notes. You only use that for those who don't accept the majority text. So let me give you a third rule of doing apologetics.
Mhm.
Third rule is, I meet people where they're at. When Paul says to a Jew, I became a Jew. So if I find someone who goes with the critical text and prefers NIV, I'll use NIV to bury him. He wants ESV, I'll use ESV to bury him. He wants Legacy Standard Bible. I don't waste time arguing why their particular version or preference for the textual tradition, the text type, is wrong. Waste of time. Because at the end of the day, even with the variations, the fact is, this is a fact, all English translations, whether they go with the majority text or the critical text, will be translating the same critical Greek text over 90% of the time, because the Greek text that they use will agree up to 92 to 97% of the time. That's how fixed the Greek text is.